Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Pod Is Cast. This episode, I'm going to be doing the long-awaited episode on the Israeli Air Force, kind of an overview of it. And then I've got a guest with me, Aiden.
Hello, I'm Aiden.
So we'll be doing a little bit on the founding of the Air Force and some of its early missions, and then just a quick kind of overview of the most, in my opinion, the most badass mission of them all during the Six-Day War, where they just destroyed enemy air forces. Anyway, so get the boring stuff out of the way. So Israel's founded in 1948. They need planes for their military because they know that they're about to go to war. And that's where this guy named Al Schwimmer, who was an American businessman, also a veteran. He worked with TWA and also did stuff with U.S. Air Transport Command. Pretty wealthy businessman individually, right, Aiden? Okay, yeah. And his job was to find American pilots and also funding from mostly American Jews to buy more planes for Israel. And so this is where he's the one that sources the Czechoslovakian planes, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so just a quick background on that one. You'll see this a lot in wars, especially wars that are not necessarily sanctioned by the rest of the world. So, for example, you've got the Rhodesian Bush War. It's really hard to get planes because of like sanctions, economic sanctions and military sanctions. So you've got to skirt those. And Al Schwimmer did that by, they're basically getting planes out of Czechoslovakia. So there was the Avia S-199s. Mm-hmm. So those are basically Mi-109s. If you're familiar, that's the German workhorse from World War II. A little bit ironic. Nazi planes flying for Israel. You also have the Supermarine Spitfire. So they were building them, or they were getting the engines out of Czechoslovakia. I don't remember.
I think they were assembling those Spitfires in Czechoslovakia, but they had like Spitfire parts or something.
Right, okay. Because they were trying to, during World War II, the British were trying to help them out. Czechoslovakia, that is. So they sent over, it wasn't very many, right? It was a couple dozen of each plane. Right?
The Mi-109s, they started off with 4 planes.
Okay, right. So, I mean, this is tiny numbers. Yeah. How many Spitfires do they have?
I don't know the numbers on the Spitfires.
They also got B-17, so that also...
They got B-17s. Those weren't Czechoslovakian. So what happened is Al Schwimmer set up a fake airline called Líneas Aéreas de Panama. And so they hopscotched these B-17s and all these bombers all across the globe. So they went from the U.S. to Panama to Brazil to Morocco to Italy, and they flew the planes from Italy to Israel, and that's how they got around the arms embargo. And so they had like 3 B-17s or something.
Okay. B-17s, for those of you who don't know, it's the Flying Fortress from World War II. It's the main U.S. bomber, the one that basically destroyed Germany's manufacturing capability. Anyway, so Aiden, why don't you tell us about some of these pilots and some of their exploits?
Yeah. So these guys are World War II pilots, and Al Schwimmer contacts them, and they had these weird clandestine meetings. And like some of these guys, one of their jobs, like before they actually started flying, was just scroll through like these registries of like these pilots from World War II, and they're looking, they're like, if they have a Jewish name, they have a Jewish name, it's like Steinberg or whatever, and they call them and they try and recruit these guys. So that was one of their first jobs. They flew all across the world, trying to hopscotch across the world, like I was saying before, to avoid the embargo. And so one of the things they did is they ended up in all these places, and they just partied so hard.
Did they really?
They were massive partiers.
Hey, man, you only live one, right? You're about to go to war in Israel or something. You don't know if you're going to make it. You might as well live now, right?
And they talk about, we had so many girlfriends, and we had all these women, and they were crazy, and everybody was like, what are these guys going to do next? And it was like this. It wasn't just like this, like in the place they went. It was like this in Israel too. But I'll get to that in a little bit. So some of the most important guys, the most well-known, one of them's name is Lou Lenart. He was an American. He was a Marine. He flew in the Pacific during World War II, and he was recruited to fight for Israel. And so he led some of the most important missions that Israel flew. Like, he saved Israel, if we're being honest. But I'll get to that also in a little bit. Another important guy, Gideon Lichtman. He was in the Air Force. He had the first dogfight kill in Israel.
So were these guys before, you mentioned Lou Lenart being a Marine, were they flying combat missions, or were they contracting? Were they looking specifically for fighter pilots, or were they looking for just kind of any pilot they could get?
They were looking for pilots with military experience. So if you flew like a B-17, you'd probably end up flying a B-17. But they were.
What if you flew like a transport, right? Because I mean, you got to remember the majority of the pilots during World War II weren't flying fighter planes, right? So
there were transport pilots, and there was also a big transport system in Israel. And so like one time when they were trying to push the Egyptians out of the Negev, they were completely surrounded, and so they had to fly in, people fly in transports with all their supplies. So there was still a lot of need for that. Okay. But these guys were all fighter pilots.
Okay, so they're recruiting fighter pilots.
So Gideon Lichtman, he had one of the first air kills. Coleman Goldstein and also Lunart actually flew from Italy in a single prop plane over the Mediterranean for 11 hours, and they were basically the first to arrive, and they were basically the foundation of the Israeli Air Force. Like these two American guys who fought in World War II are the guys who started the Israeli Air Force, basically.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. So
where in America were these guys from, by the way?
Are
they New Yorkers or
some of them Leon Frankel? He actually won the Navy Cross.
Oh.
So he was good. He was like from St. Paul, Minnesota. Lou Lenart, he was living in L.A. Gideon Lichtman, he was from New Jersey. So they were from all over. Actually, Leon Frankel is a really interesting character because he was obviously very distinguished in World War II, and he actually came home, and he was making a ton of money. He was a partner in a used car business, and he had a lot of money, and he still decided that he wanted to go to Israel and fight, which is pretty crazy. That's about all with these guys. I'll get some more guys later when I start talking about their missions. So they trained in Czechoslovakia, and they were wearing basically they're these Jewish guys from America who some of them kill Nazis. They're sitting in this Me-109 in this Messerschmitt, and they're wearing a literal Nazi flight uniform.
Luftwaffe flight uniform.
And they have the Luftwaffe wings like on their uniforms.
They cut the swastikas off, or they?
Yeah, they took off the wings. They cut off all that stuff. They had to. I mean, it'd be pretty ridiculous if they didn't. But and so they're training in these planes. They're just complete pieces of crap. They actually called them Messerschmitts because they were just so bad.
That's awesome.
And so they're training, and
it wasn't very heavily. It wasn't a super maneuverable plane. Even by 1940, in like the Battle of Britain, it was already outclassed. Even by like the Hawker Hurricanes and stuff. And
they were told they would be flying like P-51s and stuff. They're like when they talked to like Al Schwimmer, he's like, so like, what did you fly? He's like, oh, I flew the P-51, I flew this, I flew that, like all these great planes. And it's like, oh yeah, we have all of that. You're gonna be flying all of that. And they get to Czechoslovakia and they're flying these Messerschmitts. And here's the rub: it's not just that they're flying Messerschmitts. These Messerschmitts actually have bomber engines because the factory was burned down, and they weren't even fully assembled in Czechoslovakia. They had to take them apart to transport them to Israel. So that when they get to Israel, they're reassembled. So these are just the worst planes, and it's so dangerous to flying them. So basically, all these guys, they get to Israel eventually, and the first 4 planes get to Israel. The first 4 Me-109s. I think it's Me-109s. It may be a different plane actually, but I'm pretty sure it's Me-109s.
No, yeah, they're Me-109s.
What was the operation's name again?
For which one?
The Prescient? Is that what we said?
Oh yeah, I have it written down somewhere. Actually, I think I searched it. But anyway, keep going on it.
Yeah. So these guys, they land, and right after they get the Me-109s assembled, they get this call saying that these Egyptians are marching through the desert. These Egyptians...
Pleshet or something.
Pleshet, yeah, it's Pleshet. These Egyptians are marching through the desert, and they're marching broad daylight because they're like, oh, these Israelis don't have any air support. It doesn't matter, you know. And so they're marching through the desert in a line. Like I mean, you can see it so easily from the air. And so these planes just get there, and they're just assembled, and you know these pilots have to load up. And this mission is called Operation Pleshet, and it's a mission led by Lou Lenart. And Modi Alone was actually sort of the leader of the 101st, which is the name of the squadron. They said that because they wanted the enemy to think they had 100.
Yeah, so it wouldn't. I think it'd be just Squadron 101.
Squadron 101. Okay.
Yeah. 100 first sounds like you're talking about the U.S. Airborne.
Yeah.
Unit.
They wanted the enemy to think they had 100 more. So, it's a mission led by Lulinart, and Modi alone is also flying it. And there's also a guy named Eddie Cohen and one other pilot. I don't remember the pilot's name. But, so actually Eddie Cohen dies. I think the plane fails or he gets shot down. I don't remember exactly what happens. But basically what happens is they go down and they strafe. They try and dive bomb on the Egyptians, and the Egyptians stop, and they decide it's probably not a smart idea to march to the desert like that. So that actually saves Israel, because they were marching right to Tel Aviv, and the Israelis wouldn't have been able to stop them. That was perhaps the most consequential mission that was flown in, I think, the history of the Israeli Air Force, if we're being honest, because Israel would not exist if that army had been allowed to continue to keep going. So, one thing that would happen a lot is the Israelis knew that they were being bombed by the Egyptians, but a lot of them didn't know that they had an air force, and so what would happen is these pilots would crash, and these Israelis would come up to them, guns pulled out and everything. And these guys are, they're American Jews. A lot of them are pretty secular. They don't know much about Judaism. Leon Frankel said, he had to his mother had to drag him kicking and screaming to get a bar mitzvah. And so these guys who don't know any Hebrew, really don't know much about Israel at all, are getting crash landed, and these Israeli soldiers are coming up, and they're yelling things like matzah, 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 gefilte fish, oy vey, anything they could say they were Jewish. I mean, it's pretty crazy. So that happened a lot. So one of the things that continued, that was pretty much a pattern for them wherever they went, is they had a lot of fun. They got a lot of women, and they partied a ton.
That's a class. I'm gonna be honest, saying that's not. I don't know that's necessarily that was a lot of World War II pilots.
I'm sure it was.
A lot of World War II pilots were having that kind of era. We're having a ton of fun.
And so, but it was a little bit different in Israel though, because everybody in Israel their life sucked really badly. It was a struggling country, and their economy was just developing, and there were these people coming off the boats from death camps, and then these American guys who you don't really realize how much they're doing for your country. All you really realize that they're doing is they're messing around, and they're stealing Jeeps, and they're
partying.
They're partying, and they're sleeping with all these women, and some Israelis really did not like that. But I mean, without them, obviously Israel wouldn't exist. So another really interesting story is, after a little bit, Squadron was able to get the B-17s into Israel, and so they were able to actually do a bombing run on Cairo, and so they're flying into Cairo, and the airport actually turns on their control tower, says what flight are you? And a lot of these guys have been TWA pilots after the war, and so they say we're TWA, whatever. And so the Cairo airport turns on the landing lights on the strip, and obviously they don't land at the airport. They go and they bomb.
That is awesome.
And millions of people evacuate from Cairo, actually.
So was it really effective raid? So you're familiar with the Doolittle raid, right? So during World War II, right after it hit, it was our first retaliation for Pearl Harbor. We sent an aircraft carrier with these tricked out B-25s.
Yeah,
to go bomb Tokyo. And it didn't actually do anything. I mean, it didn't really destroy any manufacturing, but it was all mental.
Cairo, people fled from Cairo. Tons of people fled from Cairo.
I would say it was definitely more mental than...
Yeah, it was... It was a big mental blow, though. But the thing was, the Egyptians didn't really have a credible bombing force like the Israelis had. And so basically from that point on, the Israelis controlled the sky. These guys had a lot of fun, but they also lost a lot. So Modi alone was the guy who led them. Modi alone is also a very interesting story. He fought for the British. At first they didn't want to make him a pilot, but then he begged, and they actually made him a pilot. Modi alone was one of two real Israelis who was in the Avir Chevrut, which is the name of the Air Force at the time, and he was their leader. And so one of the saddest stories is Modi alone spent so much time. He was really the guy who kept them all together and made sure everything happened. And one day they were flying a mission to go intercept. I don't remember exactly what the mission was, but they saw a plane flip on takeoff and it crashed. It turns out it was Modi alone, and the plane, like many of those planes did, just malfunctioned. Modi alone died. And it was really a massive blow to those men because Modi alone was really the guy who kept them together. He was really their leader. So another interesting thing about these guys is they wanted to have a name, and so they came up with the 101st, as I said before, the Squadron of 101. What was I supposed to say?
Squadron 101.
Squadron 101. They also came up with a logo and a name, and they called themselves the Angels of Death. And they had this logo. It's basically like an angel of death, but with like fighter goggles or like pilot's goggles, and that still flies on Israeli planes nowadays.
That's pretty awesome. We get it.
It's actually a guy. These two guys who I think went to UCLA together, Stan Vickman and Bobby Andrews. They were both artists, and so they got a cocktail napkin and made it real quick, and now it flies on other planes. It's pretty amazing.
That's awesome.
So these guys just provided invaluable services to Israel, and like the Israeli government knew that these guys had the potential to offer so much more than Israelis could just because of their experience. Although these foreign volunteers provided a lot of help for Israel, the Israeli government and the officials knew they needed to figure out a way where they could fight for themselves. So an American who fought in the air service named George Lichter actually went back to Czechoslovakia and took a group of Israelis back to Czechoslovakia and started teaching them how to fly. And so the most notable of whom is Danny Shapira. Danny Shapira eventually went on to fight in the Air Force.
Like a U.S. Air Force?
Or in the Israeli Air Force.
Okay.
And they say George Lichter was just fearless. So these guys fought in Israel, and they all say a common theme among them was just that this time, like them fighting in Israel, was like the golden moment of their life. Lou and Art,
really?
Yeah, Lou and Art
awesome.
said he thinks that God spared them in World War II, so that they could fight and free Israel. A lot of them think it was like their purpose, like that's why they were put on this earth, which I guess makes sense. Some of these guys stayed in Israel, some of them didn't. Gideon Lichtman, who he fought, he was actually he got the first kill, I think. He got the first dogfight kill against an Egyptian Spitfire. He went back to the United States, and he actually fought in Korea too, which is pretty insane. He fought in World War II, and then he fought in Israel, then he fought in Korea, which is wow, pretty ridiculous. And he actually became a school teacher. I think Lou Lenard ended up staying in Israel. He flew for El Al Airlines.
What is that?
That's the Israeli Airlines, or
okay.
At least it was. I'm not sure if it's still around. Leon Frankel actually left early. He was the guy who was talking about who had the car dealership, and he had the Navy Cross. But generally, some of these guys said Israel, some of them didn't. But they all say that this was one of the most important things they ever did in their life. They were Americans, but they were Jews too, and it's just pretty amazing what they did. It's pretty cool that the United States that Americans were able to be the people who really saved Israel, I think.
That's pretty awesome. All right, we're gonna go continue to the later part of the Israeli Air Force's history, maybe its proudest moment, which would be during the 6-Day War. So, just a little bit. This is obviously about 20 years later, so they had a little bit better technology, and their main dealer for weapons is actually the French. So they were flying almost entirely French planes. So you have the Dassault Mirage, the Dassault Mystère. So these are fighter bombers, much faster than the prop planes, and they were actually, for the first time, really against Egyptian and Arab air forces, they had better weapons. Whereas during the war for independence, they were definitely outmatched. They were outmatched in terms of technology, obviously. Skill-wise, they were far superior. I don't think the Israeli Spitfire, or the Egyptian Spitfires, never won a single engagement. They lost every single one that they were in.
Did they?
Yeah, that's what that book I have was talking about. So during the 6-Day War, before that, there was quite a bit of tension before the war started, and so the Israelis decided to do a preemptive strike to take out the Egyptian Air Force. Definitely a justified preemptive strike, I'll say that. They called it Operation Focus, and that was under Major General Mordecai Hod, or Hode, I don't know how to pronounce that. So on June 5th, 1967, at 7:45 in the morning, they sent a good chunk of their Air Force to go take out the Egyptian Air Force before it could mobilize and become a factor. They had some surface-to-air missiles that they had to worry about, and their SA-2s the Egyptians had, but they defeated them by just flying below its launch angles, its probable launch angles. So they used fighter bombers to basically avoid any kind of retaliation. And on top of that, they actually worked with the French, and they developed these anti-runway missiles. So they would, instead of just a regular bomb where it blows up, it would basically create a sinkhole. So it would go into the ground and then blow basically a cavern. So if you wanted to repair that strip of the runway, you had to take it off completely. On top of that, they were also bombing Egyptian planes in 3 hours. By 12 o'clock noon, so remember this starts almost 8 o'clock. By the time they get, it's called the Sinai surprise strike sometimes. They destroyed 450 Egyptian aircraft by noon. On top of that, in the space of 3 hours, when they really started to bomb, they destroyed 500 Egyptian planes. The Egyptian Air Force just ceased to exist.
They couldn't scramble?
No, because they were shot on the ground. Their defense was so bad, and they were flying below any kind of radar.
They didn't have any time at all?
They had no warning. The Israelis flew below any kind of radar scanning, right? So the Egyptians didn't know they were coming, and by the time they did, it was too late because they'd already targeted every base. They destroyed 18 bases by noon.
18?
18 airfields and bases.
Oh my god.
I mean, you cannot have a surprise strike go more perfectly.
No, you can't.
Unfortunately, the Egyptians, once they realized what was happening, they sent out a call. So they sent it out to Lebanon and Syria and Jordan. What was going on? So these enemy air forces then attacked Israel. Now, they made a mistake, which was they didn't target Israeli airfields. Or they didn't really. I think they hit one or two. But they went for civilian targets. I don't know why. I think that's a horrible idea.
That's so them.
That's not only is that purposely malicious, like in kind of an evil way, but that's just poor strategy. So they start bombing these civilian targets. Well, these Israeli pilots on the way back get a message of what's going on, and so they get rerouted. So while the Syrians and Lebanese air forces, I think Iraq, like Pakistan, was secretly with them.
I'm pretty sure Iraq probably had a decent air force.
Yeah.
Iraq, at least during the 48 war, had the largest of the armies.
Yeah, so, so when Syria, Jordan, Iraq, and they were flying out, like, Lebanese, had some planes in the air, too. The Israelis just rerouted, so while these enemy planes are over Israel, the Israeli fighter bombers just go into Iraq and Syria and Lebanon, and they destroy those bases. So now these planes go to land again, these enemy planes go to land, and they realize they don't have any bases to land at. The rest of their air force has been shot in the ground. And so now they're stuck. Now they're stuck flying over the desert, and there's nowhere for them to land, and these Israeli planes just pick them off. I mean, that is the most amazing surprise attack that you destroy, and one day they achieved air superiority. And not just kind of air superiority, complete and total air superiority. The Arab air forces ceased to exist almost in entirety. They were gone. They were completely destroyed. It is because, in large part because of the tactics that they used and the skill of their pilots, but also because of French weaponry, which I mean you don't hear a lot about, but the Dassault Mirage.
Weaponry.
Yeah, they
very good.
The Dassault Mirages, the Israeli name for them means heavens. So they just were completely outmatched any of these crappy Russian planes that the Arabs were flying. So you had See, I know they had some MiG-15s. All of them had code names that NATO gave them. That's still the case today. All Russian weapons are given NATO names, different from their own. So there's the MiG-21. I think that was the Fishbed. MiG-17. I believe that was the Farmer. MiG-15 was the Faggot. There are all these code names for them, and they destroyed. Not only did they destroy Egyptian fighters and bombers, and not fighters and fighter bombers, but they destroyed like Bears and Badgers, these big Soviet bombers, completely destroyed. The rest of the war from then on out was comparatively easy to wage because no matter what, you always had air superiority. Right? So even when they were stuck and almost overrun, they could just call in their air superiority, and there was no one to challenge them. They could keep the Dassault Mirages flying the whole time. Pretty awesome. And now the Israeli Air Force to this day is still pretty dominant in that region. I think they're flying F-16s.
And F-35s.
Oh, they have F-35s too? Well, it's not even fair.
F-35Is. So any Israeli plane that's basically an American plane, you just put an I at the end and you know it's Israeli.
I don't know if that's the workhorse, though. I think the Israeli Air Force, God, they're still flying.
I'm sure they're still flying F-16s.
Yeah, I mean, the Israeli Air Force just has always had dominance in that region ever since the War for Independence. And during the Iran-Iraq War, while both those sides were busy killing each other, what did Henry Kissinger say? Can they both lose? While they were busy, the Israelis bombed and destroyed the Iraqi nuclear power plants.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
They destroyed them. They set them back literally 20 years. The Israeli Air Force just keeps everyone, and you'll see things too. So recently, a couple months ago, Iran flew drones over Israel, and Israel retaliated by sending F-16s to go fly over and do bombing runs.
Where?
It was Iranian-backed militias.
Oh, okay, I'm sure.
They're bombing.
Nobody ever actually attacks Iran. They just attack Iran's proxies.
Well, I mean, you've got the Revolutionary Guard are like actually on the ground in Syria and stuff.
Really?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
now they're considered a terrorist group. The State Department has them as a terrorist
organization. They are. They're in Venezuela as well. They're revolutionary.
They are?
Yeah, there's a Revolutionary Guard in Venezuela.
God, we gotta do something about it.
Not here, Aiden. We don't discuss foreign policy here. So the main fighter for the Israeli Air Force, you've got the F-15I. We call them Strike Eagles. Their name is the Ra'am. And then AH-64 Apaches are also attack craft. So those are like ground attack. Fighter planes are using F-15 Eagles and F-16 Fighting Falcons. And yeah, you're right. They do have F-35 Lightning IIs.
That's why I pictured this.
That's kind of... Boy, everything going wrong with that plane, you still want to buy a bunch of them? Man.
I don't understand what's wrong with that plane.
It's too slow. It's not maneuverable enough.
Is that the only problem?
It's totally underpowered. It's really expensive. It's lost pretty much all the simulated dogfights that it's been in.
Well, we have the F-22. If you have an F-22 Escort and you have the F-35 for the ground stuff, then you'd be fine, right?
Yeah, that's the plan at least. Anyway, so thank you guys so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this. I had no idea about all the characters that were the pilots early on in the war. That's so awesome. That's hilarious. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode, and we'll come in a couple more weeks and do another one. I'm not going to make any promises on what it is. I just finished a book on the Rhodesian Bush War.